Welcome, everybody, to Cosmic Divide, the Valorant debate show presented by Nifter. And you see, I am here. My name is Elevated, also known as Donnie. I run a channel called Valorant Ascended, and I'm joined by Thinking Man's Valorant, also known as Chris. And we're going to be debating one of the most important topics as we head into Valorant Champions this year, which is which region is the strongest. And I think we have some pretty interesting takes. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and just say Latin America is not the strongest region. Sorry to all of our Latin American viewers. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. Unfortunately, you guys have not won a tournament yet, so you can't be included in the running. But with that being said, we've got a lot to talk about today. So, Chris, how you doing? And are you ready to debate some Valorant?
I am doing pretty well, and I am very ready because I feel like I've been gifted the much easier side of this debate, as I'm sure anyone who has a brain understands. This is going to be very, very easy for me because all the evidence is there. So I'm ready to explain that evidence and thoroughly win this argument.
Well, we'll see there. So basically, we're heading into Champions 2022. We've got a bunch of very solid teams from various regions, but we're going to mostly be focusing on North America versus EMEA because those are realistically the two regions that everybody kind of has at the top of the power rankings. I know that we've had some really good APAC showings, from the likes of Paper Rex and Zeta Division, but ultimately, I feel like if you haven't won an international land, you can't really be qualified as potentially the strongest region. So we're going to be focusing on North America and EMEA, and as Chris is alluding to, he's going to be arguing for the side of EMEA. I'll be arguing for North America. I'm from North America. You're from EMEA. It's a little bit extra biased just to make it a little extra spicy. So do you want to go ahead and introduce us to the EMEA teams that we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so the three teams that are going to champs from EMEA are, of course, Fnatic, FPX, and Liquid. FPX, of course, the current reigning champions of Masters Copenhagen, and will probably go in, I assume, as most people's favorites, considering they won the last event. We have Fnatic, who I think have attended every single event outside one, so they're a very familiar team. I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with Fnatic at this point and their team, because they do tend to always go to these international events. And then we have Team Liquid, who again are actually a pretty regular at international events. This is definitely not their first, so I think they'll be feeling, pretty confident they can do okay. I mean, they technically didn't qualify for Masters 1 in Reykjavik, but did get to go because FPX couldn't attend, and did actually okay. I think they, surpassed expectations, and after winning LCQ, I'm sure that they feel like they probably have, an outside shot at maybe even winning the whole thing.
I'm pretty sure Sentinels would have done just as well as Liquid did if they had gotten the free slot, but that's neither here nor there. Speaking of Sentinels, we will not be talking about them very much today. Maybe a little bit here or there, but
We'll bring up Shroud for the clout.
definitely. As far as the North American teams, we have Optic, we have Exit, we have 100 Thieves. Optic obviously won the previous event, the Reykjavik Masters. They finished second at Berlin, I believe. And
Yeah,
then
a while
champions,
ago.
they
Yeah.
were third, top three, something like that. So everybody knows Optic. They've had a lot of very good results. A couple of them might have been as Envy before they were merged, but everybody basically knows that team. Xset, if you're not following North American Valorant so much, you might not really know. Obviously, they did make it to the last event and kind of bombed out, as has been sort of a pattern for North American teams in that first slot. But they definitely have a good amount of experience in young firepower. And then we have 100 Thieves, which is basically all young firepower, but the experience and the coaching staff. So definitely some interesting dynamics on the North American side of things. And yeah, I guess let's just hop into it and take a look at these three teams versus the three teams and sort of compare and contrast maybe power levels as far as the regions go. Why don't you go ahead and take it away with the EME side of things?
Okay, so let's talk about FPX. Let's start with them because they, of course, won the last international tournament. So I think their power and their strength, obviously, let's talk about their Copenhagen run, right? Because it wasn't, it wasn't the prettiest thing, and it hasn't been the easiest year for them, obviously, with world events kind of messing with some of their availability for things. Obviously, we saw that in Copenhagen as well, where they had to play with a sub. But even with a sub, they managed to get out of groups. Now, that is insanely impressive, right? And this was not like a sub that they'd been practicing with for months. This was a sub that was brought in pretty much, last minute. So Getsu can't go. We need a sub. We have maybe a week or 2 weeks to practice with them, and now we're playing with, a definitely worse player. No offense to Cider, but Sugetsu is one of the best players in the world. So, we lose one of the best players in the world, but we still manage to get out of groups. And then as soon as we get our, one of our best players in the world, we then go on a lower bracket run, and beat everyone and look pretty convincing. And I think FPX, I don't see how they couldn't be favorites because they just have pretty much everything. They play a weird kind of style strategically where they, like to sort of mix things up a lot and play a lot of weird comps, right? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And they like to counter-strat their opponents a lot rather than having kind of their own distinct style. But I think that it's proven to work now, and I think that strategy, I was a bit concerned about it coming into Copenhagen because you don't have as much time to prepare for your opponents, but clearly they just have, the required firepower and the ideas and, they could easily win this tournament. And if they do win this tournament as well, I think they'll probably go down as the best team. And I think the same could be said for Optic as well when you get to them. That if either of those teams wins this tournament, they'll probably go down as the best team before franchising comes into Valorant. Because no team has won two tournaments yet, so it definitely would be a big thing. In terms of Fnatic, obviously, Fnatic have had a weird year, I would say, where in the qualification for these events, I think they've looked like the best team in the world. In fact, I would say that for both times in actually the Challenger stages. They started off the first group stage 5-0, looked really, really good, managed to qualify in that insane game against Mech on Split that went forever. And then after that, it seemed like that game just took so much out of both teams that neither of them won a game for the rest of that stage. But then in stage 2, they came back. They got Althea, who's like crazy. They signed Enzo full time as well. After obviously Reykjavik, they had essentially no chance, right? Durka is out with COVID. Again, they have to use 2 subs essentially, right? I mean, just no chance of doing anything with 2 subs. Don't even try. But then Copenhagen comes along. Again, the qualification goes amazing. They look insane. I think they were a lot of people's favorites. I picked them to win the tournament as well. But then it started off well. They beat FPX, the eventual winners. But then they kind of went on a bit of a slide. And I think that is something that is going to be interesting, right, as how they try and correct it. Now, Fnatic are an ideas team, I think. They're kind of an ideas combined with, some good firepower now with Dirk and Althea leading the way. And they've had a lot of time to build up some ideas. I think that this is where Fnatic could have a bit of an advantage, is that they've had a lot of time to brew some stuff up. Because generally what they brew up tends to be pretty good. It doesn't tend to be too wacky, but it tends to be pretty sound. Things like the Viper mollies on Bind, that everyone copied from them. So look, coming into this tournament, I think, again, they still finished top 4. I think that they will still be doing, fine. And probably, again, up there in terms of favorites. And then we get Liquid. Now, Liquid, to me, are a team that their ceiling, their best play, is as high as anyone else. The only reason why, they had to go through LCQ and all that is because their consistency isn't quite there. But in a tournament, if you are playing at your ceiling, which they could, I think that they could go absolutely crazy. Scream went nuts in LCQ. He actually was the top fragging ACS player in Reykjavik as well when they went there. So Scream was on an absolute heater. If he keeps that up, good luck to some teams that are facing them. And I think they legit have a chance to win it. Not a good chance, but they could win it. And that is why I think EMEA, we've got 3 teams that I can legitimately say they could win it, right? And it wouldn't be less than a 1% chance. They all have a legit shot. When I'm looking at the NA teams, of course, Optic, I think, yeah, they can definitely win it.
Whoa,
I'm looking at X at 100
whoa.
Thieves.
Watch
can
the
they win
slander.
it? Can they win it? I'm not so sure. Can they do okay? Can they get out of groups? Can they win a playoff game? Yeah, I could see that for both of the teams. Can they actually win the tournament? I just don't think they have that kind of level in them personally to actually do that. But go ahead, try and convince people why they do.
Okay, well, let me tell you about the land of the free, okay? Because the land of the
Yeah,
free
it's free.
is
Free wins.
it's all about the freedom to play your best and be your best. It's all about meritocracy here in North America. And let me tell you something, 100 Thieves, Acend, Optic have earned their way to this stage. Now, Optic, we don't even really need to talk about them. We got the best player in the world, Yay. They've probably got the best IGL in the world, FNS. They probably got the best smoker in the world, in Marv. They probably have the best. Okay, their supporting cast is definitely top 3, top 4, top 5, something like that. Optic is clearly proven that they have the ability to win tournaments. And I think, honestly, we've kind of seen maybe like 80% Optic at the last few tournaments because they have been so consistently having to do the work to be the best team, which, as everybody knows, is very hard. Nobody is repeated, right? In Valorant, nobody has repeated as an international champion because it's very hard to stay on top. So we already know that Optic has what it takes to win, and with a break in between, the time to kind of refresh and figure out some new strats and hide some things because they didn't have to show anything in the LCQ to get here, they're going to have a lot of cool stuff coming in, and we know that Chet is just the cringiest coach alive, so that's a point in their favor, in my opinion. Moving on to Exet, this is a team that is a consistent team, and I think that a consistent team is a good team for an international tournament. Consistently fourth place, it's still a pretty good placement. And, overall, I think we'll have to kind of revisit this when we come back. Is we'll tally up all of the placements of like the 3 NA teams, the 3 EMEA teams, and we can compare. We'll see. But as far as Exit goes, they came in to their very first international tournament finally in Copenhagen, and yeah, they didn't have the best showing, but what they did have is they had their 2 young stars perform quite well. And that was something that a lot of people were not thinking was going to be the case. Because a lot of times young players come on LAN for the first time and they struggle to kind of deal with the pressure of being in front of a crowd on stage, not at your setup, not in your bedroom, not having your mom bringing you food in between games. And so the fact that they performed well, Cryocells and Zekken, is a good point in their favor. And then the other 3 players, Aaron, Def, and oh my God, who's the third player? BCJ, that's right. Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yeah. Big man himself. These guys, they were a little shaky at times, but they also had moments of brilliance, and they are a very solid supporting cast for these 2 young stars, which I think with that extra bit of experience on LAN, and maybe everybody gets to shake off the jitters a little bit. Again, they didn't have to go through qualifiers, so they've kind of had time to maybe rebuild some strategies because they were a little bit inflexible, I'll admit, in Copenhagen. But I think that they can integrate some new unique strategies and ideas on maps that people will not have seen before, and then they can execute it with that consistency that has been kind of the hallmark of this team going for essentially all of Valorant that they've been playing. Now, let's talk about 100 Thieves, because this is definitely my wildcard team, kind of like your Liquid take. 100 Thieves is a team that is very hard for me to read just because their peaks are very, very high. I think that Asuna legitimately on a given day could be the best rifler in the game, period. And I think that they have found out ways to enable him more by taking the operator out of his hands, which is what everybody was asking for the first year of Valorant. Just let this guy rifle, let him do his thing. And so they've done that now. They have a supporting cast around him that is willing to work off of his utility and enable him. And then those supporting pieces of Derek and Bang are really 2 of the craziest young talents in North America that are not playing the star duelist role, which I think is a good point in their favor, because if you're not the star duelist, I think on LAN, there's a little bit less pressure to be insane. And so that kind of takes the pressure off of you to allow you to maybe just, play the game that you want to play. I really do think that Derek is something special with his utility usage and clutch factor, and Bang is another one of those players that on a given day, on a given map, could legitimately just kind of like skill diff everybody in the server. So then that brings us to Stellar and Will, who are again kind of unproven factors, but they have shown the ability to step up when it matters. And I think that this is one of those teams that is going to be able to rely heavily on their experienced coaching staff of Mike's, Sean, and DDK to kind of help them, push through the LAN jitters and especially when you have such short turnaround between games to prepare for teams. And I think that you and I would probably agree that Valorant is a very complex game that kind of like switching things up and figuring things out in a short period of time can be very difficult to do. And so coaching staff actually can make a pretty big difference. So I will agree with you. And I know I shouldn't be agreeing this early on in a debate, but I will agree with you that I wouldn't necessarily say 100 Thieves, Exet, and Optic have a higher chance of winning the event when you add them in total against Fnatic, FPX, and Liquid. But I do think that they maybe have more potential to surprise than the EMEA trio.
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch on what I think. Again, Optic we don't really need to talk about, but Xset, I think, especially for people who watch a lot of my stuff, because Xset playing in Copenhagen just made me go absolutely crazy. They just made like so many like clearly like nervous mistakes. It felt like where it's just like, why are you doing this, right? Like if you were calm, you wouldn't be making these decisions because it doesn't make any sense. And I was just raging at them, and so now it's kind of become a bit of a thing that everyone thinks I hate Xset, but actually I think coming into this tournament, I actually think that with that experience, as you said, and the fact that Zakin and Cryo still did play very well, I actually think that they might be the real dark horse, right? I've heard a lot of like Reddit threads and whatever of like, oh, who's your dark horse, and people saying like, oh, it's Liquid, or because they are literally a dark horse, their logo, or it's all these other Edward Gaming, right? I actually think Xset are the team that because they just lost 2 games in the last tournament, everyone just thinks they're not good, right? So they can't even be a dark horse. But that's the thing, they are underrated, I think, because whilst Cryo and Zekken played well, I think that the other 3 members of the team, as you kind of alluded to, didn't play up to their standards, and I'm sure that they would probably agree. And I think with that experience of being in this situation, I think they'll probably be a bit calmer. I think they have a one of the easier groups as well, which might help. I actually think that they could. I mean, depending on when this goes out, this could be a terrible take if XR have already been been eliminated, depending on when this releases. But I do think they have the potential to be a dark horse. 100 Thieves, I agree. I think 100 Thieves, if this was a year in the future, right, and they'd stuck together, I think if they stick together with the coaching staff and the players and whatnot, and they continue to build and whatnot, I think they'll be up there with Optic, right? Where it's like those 2 teams are like competing to be the best in North America. I think it's maybe a bit early for them. This will be good experience, but I do think that this one's a bit early. But in the future, and I assume 100 Thieves will get into franchising. It'd be a big surprise if they didn't. That this roster and this kind of idea that they have going forward could be very, very scary indeed. But right now, I would say that Fnatic, FPX, Liquid, they all have that experience already. All of them have been deep in tournaments. All of them have been in a top 3, I think. Did Liquid come third in champs? Or fourth?
Third, fourth, one of those.
It's like third or fourth, yeah.
Yeah.
So, they've all been really deep in tournaments as well. So I just think that kind of an experience diff and maybe a mentality that 100 Thieves might come into the tournament being like, if we get out of groups and we maybe win a playoff game, hey, that was good for us, right? Our first tournament, they won't feel too bad about it. Whereas, if Fnatic and FPX, and maybe even Liquid to an extent as well, probably coming in with this, it's win or it's not good, right? And so I think that does lean it in EMEA, but I think if we did this in a year's time, with teams like 100 Thieves and if Optic was still there, I would be more concerned, I think.
Well, little do you know that Nadeshot has pulled out all the stops and built a hyperbaric time chamber in the 100 Thieves compound. So a year's time ain't nothing for North America. But you know what?
He's gonna cryogenically freeze Shroud in there as well to make sure he doesn't get any older and then sign into 100
the clout.
Yeah.
But okay, so obviously we can look at these results. We look at the past results of the last year or so. We look at the teams and where their placement is currently as far as we're concerned. But let's get a little bit more like granular, a little bit deeper into kind of like what makes a good team. And let's talk about the IGLs, because I think there's a little bit of separation, between regions and teams as far as like the ideas that power how they play the game. So let me just start with North America. Obviously, we've got FNS, probably the most experienced IGL in Valorant, I would say.
Angel would be up there as well. But
yeah. That's true. Okay, Angel, FNS, they've both been around forever. And I think that I'll just talk about FNS and let you talk about Angel. Um, FNS has shown his, let daddy call. He's gonna step in. He's gonna make the calls. The mid rounding on Optic has been one of their strongest points for their entire existence. They're very, very good at reading other teams. They're very, very good at counter-stratting other teams, and they're very good at adapting on the fly to what other teams are doing. And I think that in a long, drawn-out tournament like this with a lot of teams, that is sort of one of those things that is very, very important. And if I can slander Angel just a little bit, he is more of the person that likes to make teams adapt by changing things constantly as opposed to counter-stratting things. And yes, I'll give him some credit for being a very strong IGL with good mid-rounding, but I do think that FNS probably has him beat just a little bit as far as his consistency of his calls and the fact that he's not constantly running in and dying at the very beginning of every single round. Now let's go ahead.
Famously say that he prefers to call when he's dead. So I think
True.
sometimes like it makes it easier for him because he can just click on the different people and
That's
realize
true.
what they're doing.
That is true. Now let's go ahead and talk about Def, because I think this is one factor that maybe a lot of people don't really realize is that we talk a
He's
lot
from
about.
EMEA. He's from EMEA.
Okay, well, okay, sometimes you gotta do a little Space Jam, steal the talent, put it into your own team. We'll take that here. But he's a very experienced IGL as well. I think people don't really realize how long he's been around, the tech FPS
Just
scene.
calling him old. You're just calling him old.
But sometimes
such a polite way of saying he's so old.
You need to balance the youth on your team with old and decrepit brain power. And so I think that Def has that nice balancing effect that is maybe lacking on Liquid. And so I think that it's pretty nice to have at least two teams with very, very strong IGL capacity. And then when we go ahead and talk about 100 Thieves, Stellar, kind of on the young side, but he does have that sort of brain trust behind him of experienced IGLing that can help mentor him and guide him. And he's shown that he is a very solid in-game leader as far as just, continually calling very consistent strats. They're not afraid to use timeouts. I know I'm talking a little bit more about the coaching staff than Stellar here, but let's be honest, they're a little bit more proven in terms of the pedigree. And we can see how often Sean is willing to hop in, call a timeout, and then let Stellar take the reins from there. And it's been one of the more impactful, I think, coach differences between the teams. 100 Thieves, they call a timeout, and suddenly they're winning rounds again. And I think that is a pretty strong factor, again, with needing to adapt on the fly.
Okay. Is this my space to talk about EMEA? And let's start with let's start with Angel and Boaster, because this is, I think, one of the differences. I think Optic and maybe Xset as well, although I'm not quite sure. But I know that for Fnatic and FBX, Boaster and Angel aren't just IGLs. They are kind of the main brain power behind how those teams play. Doom Bros and Mini, the coaches for those two teams, and I've heard Mini say this as well, that like he's just supporting Boaster's vision of the game, right? Boaster is the main mind, and Mini is there to support him, right? It's not coming from a coach like it might come from, and I would expect it comes from Sean for 100 Thieves, right? And Stellar is kind of just like, guiding it in game from what Sean is telling them. It's not like that, I don't think, for Fnatic and FPX, where we have IGLs that are truly like, the main spearhead of this team. It might be true for Optic and XR, I'm not quite sure, but I know for those two teams that is a fact. And I think that the thing for me about the IGLs, and maybe this is because I just watch a lot of Valorant and a lot of, I watch a lot of games and have to, so I get a bit bored if teams are just doing the same things that a lot of other teams are doing. But I do think that NA as a whole tends to be more kind of, linear in terms of like what they do. You don't have as many teams doing as much different stuff. I think in NA, right? So it can get a bit sort of samey, right? As soon as someone proves an idea works in NA, I think a lot of teams just kind of go, "Oh, that works, so let's do that." Which is fine. There's no problem if something does work. It's good, but I think here in EMEA, and not even just teams like FBX who do a lot of crazy stuff, right? Liquid shake things up and do quite a few crazy stuff. I mean, Fnatic come up with some crazy ideas as well. We also have teams like Mech who seems like invent half the comps that teams run. There is a lot of difference, I think, in ideas, and a lot of different ideas come from EMEA. And I think, a large part of that obviously is the different IGLs that teams have. Now, let me quickly talk about Liquid, though, because obviously Liquid, the
Aha.
IGL factor for them, might be one of kind of, you might say, their weaknesses, right? Scream is currently IGLing, and he's doing that from the duelist position, which is not, the most normal thing that teams tend to do with their IGL. But hey, it worked well enough to get them to this tournament. And Scream, his individual performance was insane. So, that's clearly not having like an effect on his overall individual play either. And yeah, sure, I think Liquid still definitely have that problem where, sometimes like their mid rounding or if their original ideas aren't going too great, they can struggle. Sometimes, it does look a bit like, what are you doing? Um, but if things are going right, and they probably have a more fluid system, right, where it's not, if Angel is calling something, Angel is calling it, right? If FNS is saying something, everyone's listening. Liquid, I would assume, is more of a team effort where everyone's kind of I know Yampy used to be there IGL as well, and I'm sure they kind of have different people kind of taking the reins in different situations. That seems like it would make the most sense for a team like them, and so yeah, their IGL and Scream, is his IGLing like on the same level as some of these others that we're bringing up? No, probably not, and he would probably admit that himself. I'm sure, but they make it work with their own. I mean, it's funny they're called Liquid, right? Their own fluid system. It works well enough to get here, and as I said, if things do go well, then they are a very dangerous team, right? And I think that is the thing, that you can get good Liquid or you can get bad Liquid, and I think that this problem is why sometimes they look like, what are you doing? And sometimes it looks like, oh my god, this is amazing, because it depends on, are their ideas good that day or are they not? Because they don't have that same structure that others do. But I think as a region as a whole, EMEA has not only like the experienced IGLs like Angel, or the great ideas and the kind of that mind for the game like Bosa does, but we also have just a ton outside of these three teams of IGLs and and coaching staffs as well to support them, that come up with their own unique flavors of the game as well. And so I think as the IGLs go in this tournament, I wouldn't say that this is like a clear winner, but I do think that EMEA has enough basically to prove that, yeah, they are actually at least on the level, if not maybe slightly ahead, you could argue, depending on whether Angel is just throwing.
Okay, well, just one last little point of rebuttal there.
Go
There's
on.
definitely a few, if they're playing well, they're gonna win the game.
That's just liquid. That's just liquid. Liquid. That's always liquid.
But I do want to actually kind of come back to the point that you were talking about with Boaster and Angel kind of being like the brains behind the whole operation,
Yeah.
because I think that there is a little bit of a difference in terms of philosophy almost between North
Yeah.
America and EMEA, where it's like EMEA is like one point of failure to some extent, which is the
Mm.
IGL, and we have seen Boaster has had some pretty like crushing moments in games and series where like they lose, and it's like he clearly looks like, oh my god, like what
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
um
Like everything's on him. Yeah.
yeah, and so I'm not trying to like slander that approach, but that definitely is something that can weigh very heavily on a player and affect their performance in the game itself. And as far as like the calling and stuff goes, and obviously Mini and Doom Bros play a huge role in these team success as well. So I'm not trying to say that they don't, but I do kind of feel like in North America you have Optic has gone on the record being like, Chet calls a timeout, he tells us what to do, we don't ask questions, we just do it, and like that kind of takes a bit of weight off of FNS's mind, I'm sure. And I believe that Psycho for Exet also has a pretty similar approach of being like very heavy handed as far as like how he coaches the team, and I would imagine it's kind of similar for Under Thieves as well. So that is just kind of an interesting difference between. I don't know which one is necessarily better. Um, let's talk about firepower. Let's talk about headshots. Let's talk about multi kills, because that's what everybody really wants to watch Valorant for. We've got maybe one or two more topics here, but let's dive into the actual firepower of the regions. Who just simply clicks on people better? Who's got the better mechanics?
Well, I'll start with EMEA, and let's start with Liquid, who are, I think, team firepower. I talked about like, oh, their IGL thing might not be as good. This is where Liquid comes in big for the argument for EMEA. This is where Liquid is really saving EMEA because, well, not saving, but just really bolstering that argument.
Ah.
Oh, we'll get to the other two teams. Don't worry. We got more than enough firepower in the other two teams and outside of these three teams as well. But Liquid, obviously, you've got Scream. Like, you're talking about headshots. We got Scream. What more is it to say? And then
We've
Yampy
got
as
Shroud.
well.
We've got Shroud.
We got Yampy as well, who I think on his given day is just absolutely absurd, insane. You know, he plays op on Breach. Like he trusts himself so much with an op that he's willing to op on Breach. You know, this is who he is. And Liquid, I mean, yeah, all of their players are absolutely nutty correct. You know, and I don't think anyone would really dispute that. That's just who they have always kind of been. That's kind of the main thing that's carried them, you know, to international tournaments and it's why they're probably here. FPX, again, Sugetsu, I think I saw, you know, some of Pletchat's top 20 ratings or whatever. How Sugetsu is not in the top 3, I don't know. Because he's in my top 3.
I agree.
And he's probably not 3 either. Because when you watch him play, he is insane. He is absolutely absurdly insane. I mean, everyone can now think of the moment that he won Copenhagen with, where he's just tapping 4 people's heads in a row. He's insane. And Xiao, I mean, you could say much the same. He had like, what, 1 million 1v3s or something? You know, and you don't do that by getting a bunch of leg shots, right? So, and even Artist. I'm not even mentioning Artist, who's probably the best chamber at the entire tournament. So yeah, again, FPX, I mean, obviously to win a tournament, you need a lot of firepower. Fnatic as well. Obviously, Alfia and Durka are going to be like the main proponents of this. And I do think that, you know, one of the reasons that Fnatic maybe didn't go all the way was because Durka didn't have his best tournament. But Durka has shown more consistently than not that at every other tournament he's been to, he's absolutely been insane. So I kind of expect that that might happen again for them. And Alfia as well, I mean, probably had the best qualification, I mean, maybe ever. Who knows? Because that stage 2 that he put up together when he first joined Fnatic was absurd. Like, he was just clearly the best player in the server. It wasn't even close in every single game, it felt like. And so, yeah, Fnatic have the firepower as well. And then even going outside of these 3 teams, you know, we've got obviously people like CNED, you got Starkso, you got Safe and Trex who are at the top of Masters Copenhagen scoreboards as well. I haven't even mentioned Nats yet. You know, I've gone this deep and I haven't even mentioned the name Nats, who, look, again, if this was my list of the best players in the world and, you know, Nats is on there, Nats is in the very, very top of that list. You know, I know he's not going to champs, but if he was, then he would be at the very, very top of the list for me. And Chronicle as well, right? Chronicle has shown it as well. So I think EMEA as a whole has a ton of firepower, and the 3 teams that are representing EMEA also have a ton of firepower. And I really do think the EMEA has a firepower diff here because I think they're more proven, and I think, you know, they tend to go further with these tournaments. Sure, you've got 100 Thieves and you know, oh, I believe in Bang doing well. Well, I'm yet to see it, you know, and we'll see. Maybe he will do very well, but I know that Scream will do well. I know that Durka will do well. And I know that Sugetsu will do well. And so I trust EMEA.
Okay, well, that's fair. You know, as you were listing off these names, I was like, that's a pretty good point. That's also a pretty good point. But I do have to say, if we were just to kind of compare the teams 1-to-1 across, let's compare Optic and FPX. Okay, we've got Ye, and then we have Artist. I'm gonna take Ye, to be perfectly honest. I know that Artist had an incredible tournament. I will admit that he was probably the best chamber at that tournament, but historically, Ye is just simply the best fragger in the game. He's just kind of done that tournament in, tournament out. Okay, then let's talk about Victor. You know, we've got Zipan and Victor kind of fill similar roles where they both tend to go in and die a lot, but then they also both tend to go in and kill everybody when they're supposed to die. And so, you know, both players incredibly cracked, incredibly streaky, but also incredibly good at what they do. Now we've got Marved and we've got, I don't know, who should I compare him to? Angel or Sugetsu? I would pick Sugetsu because they're both kind of like the clutch players. Then okay, I'm actually gonna stop talking about FPX because that team is a little bit scary. So let's move on to Fnatic.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Oh, what are you going? Who's next? Oh, it's Xiao. Oh no, they got Xiao as well.
We're done talking about FPX.
They keep having more of these players that are really good.
Okay, well, moving on. Okay, Crashy's incredible. FNS, not known for his firepower. That's fine.
Got
Sometimes
Chow.
you gotta
We've
have
got
the
Chow.
bullshit. But I do want to actually point to Fnatic specifically because I think that this is a team where the firepower can be a little bit of an issue. Just because if it's not Alfir and Durka, who is going to step up? Is it going to be Boaster with a 40 kill Astra game? I don't know. That's not going to happen every single
Put
time.
him on the up. Put him on the up and watch it happen.
I do genuinely think that the duelist combos on the North American teams can stand up against the EMEA teams. I mean, Asuna and Will, heavy firepower, but more than that, Derek and Bang, I think as a duo in terms of the support role, can probably frag with anybody in the duelist role in the entire tournament. I really am super, super confident that Derek and Bang are going to impress at this tournament. And I think that 100 Thieves is like kind of a good parallel to Team Liquid, where like everybody on the team is very, very strong mechanically. Then if we compare Fnatic and Xset, I do actually kind of favor Xset in terms of firepower, just because I think that Zekken and Cryocells and BCJ, those three, can probably stand up to and even surpass the Fnatic trio of, let's say, Alfie or Durka and Mystic or Enzo, whichever one you want to throw in there. I think it's close, but I do think that we have maybe slightly more firepower in terms of just mechanical skill in North America, because honestly, we only care about the clout. We care about the stream numbers. We care about the multi-kills. They're being put in montages. It's why people still think that Wardell is one of the best players in the world when he hasn't been on a team in forever. It's because, oh, Wardell clicks on stuff. Cool. Yes, we love that stuff here in North America. So yeah, if you want to expand to the rest of the region as well, North America, they only care about mechanics. They don't care about strategy. And because of that, I think North American firepower gets the diff.
I think you've got me there that the NA teams are still stuck very much in a kind of Twitch numbers and Twitter followers world. And that has cost them, I think, somewhat. So I will concede that probably is still the case. The one thing I would just say though is regarding Fnatic is that I agree that, like, you know, when we're comparing them to Xset, it's kind of an interesting comparison because like both teams have kind of like two like standout players that it's like, you know, these are the main fraggers of the team, and then three kind of, you know, more supportive role players. The thing about Fnatic is it's difficult to say which one is going to frag out because they all seem to take turns, right? Boaster had a terrible Iceland, but Enzo actually, who was actually a sub for that tournament, did really well. Mystic has had like little moments, and I know that Durka in an interview said that Mystic, ever since they lost and he had a very bad Copenhagen, apparently has looked insane recently. And Durka said that he expects Mystic to like go crazy. So I have a little bit of Mystic hopium, you know, coming from Durka there perhaps. But Boaster had a good tournament. He had a good Copenhagen, right? Even though he was playing, you know, Astra, whatever, and picking up and up and whatnot. You know, he did have a better tournament fragging wise than he had done, I think, at any previous tournament, to be honest. So it's kind of one of them things where, yeah, consistency might not be there for Fnatic in terms of those other three, but I trust kind of one of them at least is going to step up and at least will be on kind of, you know, a BCJ kind of level, who at Copenhagen, he did okay, I think, on Omen, but like when he wasn't playing Omen, he seemed worse, which is kind of weird because, you know, you would think when you're playing like Sky or whatever, you might do a bit better than you would on Omen, but it seemed like for him, for whatever reason, he didn't. And so, you know, I do think that, honestly, I'd probably call it 50-50 between those two. But I do think the firepower is probably the closest one in my mind so far. Like, that's the one that I can see, like, okay, maybe there's, you know, at least one argument that you can make for an A, which is the clout factor, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's go on to talking about clout then. Because, you know, if we're going to factor it in as far as regional strength, band strength, you know, when you're facing elimination, you need that spirit bomb. You need people sending you energy. Sometimes it's toxic energy on Twitter, but most of the time it's positive energy when you're in the game. Which region has more clout? It's North America. There's no comparison. It's over.
Okay, you're just lucky. You're just so lucky that 100 hoodies managed to qualify for this event, because if replace 100 thieves with, I don't know, whoever it might be, pretty much anyone else, and I think you could make an argument, especially after FPX won an event, right? I think that that's the thing that's gone a bit under the radar. That sure, FPX wouldn't have been a known team before, but you win an event and everyone takes notice and is like, oh, they're the best team. So people coming into it right now might be watching their first tournament, Masters Copenhagen. They see FPX win it, they're like, oh, I like FPX, right? So you win a tournament, your clout goes up. Fnatic and Liquid, if you were just to poll esports fans about name 5 esports teams, Fnatic and Liquid, are probably in almost everyone's lists, right? Because they are just the big orgs. Talking about orgs that are probably in franchising without even needing to apply, those two would be there. So
That's fair, but
I think
then the other names would be Optic and 100 Thieves and Sentinels and Cloud9, NRG.
yeah, we don't need to care about that night. Crucial point is though, you didn't mention just clout, but fans being there. And where is this event being held? Of course, Turkey. Who are those Turkish fans? Are those Turkish fans gonna turn up and be like, oh yeah, I love, I love, I don't know, Marved? No, they're gonna be supporting Althea. Fnatic are gonna have the crowd behind them in every single game, just because they have one Turkish player, right? So Fnatic, I think, are gonna have the crowd, and then just for EMEA pride, I'm sure there's plenty of Turkish people who will be there as well. That are like me, where they aren't gonna want to see the NA teams win. NA are gonna be at the bottom of that list of teams that they're there to support. So in this tournament, I think the support buff is going to go to the EMEA teams over the NA teams. And so, yeah, sure, you might have more Twitter followers, but when it comes to the actual tournaments, the seats there, clearly Riot understand that EMEA is the place to host these tournaments, as they always seem to pick EMEA for whatever reason. And yeah, so I think that EMEA will have that buff in the tournament as well.
Okay, fair enough. That's a pretty good point about the Turkish fans supporting Fnatic. So let's move on to our closing arguments. Do you have any final words to say about EMEA and why they're the better region than North America?
It's just simple, basically. If you just have watched this esport unfold over the past 2 years, uh, then I don't think you would have any argument for them being the worse than NA. Just in terms of the amount of tournaments won, and I know that people are gonna say like, oh, where if you combine all of the teams and you look at EMEA got more slots, last year or whatever, all of that nonsense. You have to remember, if you take out Masters Reykjavik, right? Because in Reykjavik, let me explain. We sent G2 as our top seed. That was a mistake. Okay, that was a mistake. That wasn't meant to happen. Okay, it was meant to be FPX. And if FPX could have gone, you can't convince me that FPX, who were playing, I would say, better than they did in Stage 2 at that point. They won Stage 1, they didn't win Stage 2, and they were playing insane at that point. They beat Fnatic 13-0 in one of those games. FPX at least would have been in the top 3. They might have even won it. I know I don't want to take it away from Optic or steal it away, but it is a big what if, because I think if FPX go on to win champs, they would have won everything they could have. They would have won EMEA. Obviously, they couldn't attend Reykjavik. They would have won Copenhagen. And if they go on to win champs, then they would have had pretty much a flawless year, which would be pretty insane overall. So yeah, if you just take away Reykjavik, because we sent G2, obviously everyone knows that that's a mistake. We sent Fnatic without, with 2 subs, so that barely counts. And we sent, an inconsistent Liquid side that did actually make it out of groups somehow. Liquid were playing terribly at that point, and they still made it out of groups. So to me, and then obviously you win Copenhagen, you have a team finish, what was it, 4th? Fnatic came in Copenhagen as well. It's like, clearly to me, EMEA is on the rise. It is the better region. And if you ignore this one outlier tournament where our best team couldn't attend, it's pretty clear that EMEA has been on top for really, ever since the end of Sentinels winning the first international LAN.
Well, I don't know if I would go that far. I mean, we did have the Optic win in there, and just out of curiosity, coming into this little discussion that we're gonna have, I went back and just looked at all the results and then assigned point values for winning. So it's like if there's 16 teams in the tournament, the winning team gets 16 points. The last place team, it kind of just scales down. If there's a bunch of people at the same place, then they all kind of get the same point value.
We just take out G2 results though, and then recalibrate
well,
it.
Funnily enough, they didn't earn you guys very many points, period. So yeah. you can basically just take them out anyway. But essentially, overall, EMEA did come out pretty far ahead in terms of just overall points, but we also have to remember that they were getting 3 and 4 slots to every tournament, whereas North America was stuck at 2 in almost every single tournament except for Champions, and then on Berlin, I guess they had 3 as well. But if you take all those numbers and then you actually divide by the amount of teams that played at the events, then you end up with EU coming in at 9 points earned per like team that attended an event and could have earned points, and North America came in at 8.92 points per team that
which is
attended
less.
and could have.
I just want to point out that that is less than.
But then also, if we go on to wins in favor of EU has 3 wins. North America has 2 wins at international lands. Remember, we're still having to factor in the less amount of teams for North America. Then, if we go into top 3 finishes,
not if you discount G2.
EU comes in at 7 top 3 finishes, and North America comes in at 5. Again, with less teams attending at every single event. So,
Point out again, though, is 7 bigger than 5?
I think in EU math, maybe, but in North America.
Well, that's classic NA.
In North America, the larger number is usually lower down the totem pole. So 5th place ahead of 7th place, etc. But at the end of the day, I think it's pretty darn close. I think we can both agree, bring it back together. It's pretty darn close, all things considered. And while I will say that FPX is probably my favorite going into Champions, beyond that, and I don't think they're that far ahead of Optic, if not completely equal to Optic. Beyond that, I'm very, very curious to see how the rest of the teams shake out.
We know, well, I know exactly what's going to happen. 100 Thieves and Exet aren't going to win a game, let's be real. And Ye is going to get a severe nerf from the chamber nerfs. It turns out that the chamber nerfs did matter. Ye can't play any agents. Optic fall apart. They don't win a game either. I mean, if that did happen, and again, if this comes out and that has happened, then that is going to be pretty funny. If that has already happened by the time this comes out, or if it's on its way to happening as well. But yeah, that's my prediction for how this is going to go for NA. And the top 3 will be Fnatic, FPX, and well, actually, Paper-Rex will make it to 3rd, but Liquid will finish in 4th. So, pretty good for EMEA. Unfortunate for NA, but there you go. No need to watch champs. That's what's going to happen. Because it's all there for you to see that.
Well, I was trying to cut your mic that whole time, but unfortunately, as we are an EU org, they were not cutting. Production was not listening to me, so we got to hear all of that unnecessary drivel coming out of your mouth. But at the end of the day, it's been a good discussion. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining us here on Cosmic Divide. Again, thank you to Nifter for building us this excellent studio, and we'll be back with another episode. Let us know who you think won this argument down in the comments below. And if you don't type North America, we'll just delete those comments.
Oh, you'll be right. You'll be correct.